Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Enter 21 at your place today. Hope you enjoyed a relaxing evening yesterday and the conference today. Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Enter 21 at your place today. Hope you enjoyed a relaxing evening yesterday and the conference today. Good morning, everybody. Sorry. I had I had a tap open in the main hall, so sorry everybody. So I hope you enjoyed a relaxing evening yesterday and the conference. So today we invite you again to a very inspiring and exciting program with a lot of speaker and research sessions and hopefully with a lot of insights. Don't forget to share your thoughts and insights on Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook. You can see your post later in our social wall. Please use hashtag Enter21 or #IFIT. So for now, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Dirk Schmücker now to the stage. Hello, Dirk. So I'm very happy to introduce you to Professor Dr. Dirk Schmücker, German Institute for Tourism Research and Institute for Tourism Research in Northern Europe, Kiel. So Dirk gained his first professional experience as an apprentice travel agent. His first contact with practical market research, apart from some practical projects at the university, was during an internship at the Studienkreis in Starnberg. He was particularly enthusiastic about the Reiseanalyse, which is the oldest and most well-known thing in Germany for data, the market research flagship, and aroused his interest in dealing intensively with all aspects of tourism market research. He studied business administration, economic and social geography, and tourism management at the University of Lüneburg and worked as a research assistant at the chair of strategic management and tourism management with Professor Dr. Edgar Kralkamp. His dissertation at the University of Lüneburg contains not only theoretical modeling and empirical testing, but also a whole range of survey and analysis methods. So, Dirk, I'm very happy that you are here this morning and that you are sharing with us your insights as an applied perspective using digitalization to make tourism more sustainable. So, Dirk, the stage is yours. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Claudia. I hope everybody can hear me. I have no auditive feedback. I have no visual feedback, so I just start talking, and I hope that everybody can hear and see me and can see my presentation by now. So yes, thank you for the invitation. I'm really proud to be part of this really wonderful and extraordinary conference. And the topic today is using digitization to make tourism more sustainable with a question mark and applied perspective. So this will not be so much about academia, pure academics, but rather an applied perspective. One of the most frequent questions in every conference with every presentations is, can we get the charts? Can we get the PowerPoint? So everybody asks that, and here's the answer: yes, you can get it. I would like to have another preliminary. If you have ever mail ordered something, you might have made the experience that you get a very small item of value packed into a very large box. And the people who packed the box have to do something to fill the void, to fill the empty space. And they use styrofoam. And honestly, when I thought about this presentation today, I had quickly identified the small items of value I would like to relay to you, I would like to send to you. But then there was this large 60-minute box and a lot of empty space. And I decided not to try to fill that with styrofoam to blow styrofoam into your brains, but rather to tell you what I wanted to tell you. And if it's over after 30 or 40 minutes, then it's over after 30 or 40 minutes. And I hope you are okay with that. Because after this presentation at 12 o'clock, we will have the really interesting program points, the research program going on starting at 12. And this will maybe give us the chance to have a breath of air, which everybody needs in this strange time under home office and COVID-19. So what do I want to do today? I've prepared two parts. The first is on sustainability and digitization. That is the title of the presentation. It's more or less the broader framework where we try to assess if and how digitization can help with sustainable tourism development. And the problem with that is that the study is really, really old. It has been produced in the years 2018, 2019. So it's over a year old, and that is really early Middle Ages, if you want so. And so I decided to take that only as a reference framework and use something more urgent as the topic for the second part. That's about visitor management and recommended systems. And the fact that makes it so urgent is, of course, COVID-19. And that will draw references to the presentation from Martin and Dominic that you could hear yesterday, which had a similar topic. And we, in fact, closely cooperate on this topic. So some things might be familiar for you with that. So let's start out with sustainability and digitization. As I said, a old study produced in 2018, 2019. Of course, not the first study in that field. There are books being written about that. For example, this one by Alicia Ali and Andrew Frew. I have it here. I can recommend that book. It's really very good. It has been published in 2013, so we were not the first to make a study on this broader topic. Our study was commissioned by the German Environment Agency, which is a part of the German Federal Ministry of the Environment. And they asked themselves whether digitization is more of an opportunity or more of a risk for sustainable tourism development as a whole. And as you can see from the title, the impact of digitization and big data analysis on the sustainable development of tourism and its environmental impact, it was quite broad and needed some structuring. When you have finished reading the title, you have already forgotten the first words, but that might be typically German, I don't know. Anyway, so who is we? I would like to introduce you to the authors of this study. There are three of us, and I would like to show all three to you. First of all, to give them credit, of course, but then also because they are very nice and very competent colleagues. But also to show you that we had different perspectives on this topic. Edgar Kralkamp was already mentioned by Claudia in the beginning. He is a now retired professor for strategic management, and he worked in tourism management, tourism research for about 35 years. So he had a strategic perspective on that. And Erik Horster is an expert in digital tourism, professor at the University of Applied Sciences in Heide. I mean, myself, I'm a consumer researcher, so I put in the consumer perspective and the sustainability perspective on the consumer side. So you might remember that way back in 2018, there was this, well, everybody was talking about something 4.0. So there was consumption 4.0 and industry 4.0. And of course, we tried to put tourism 4.0 in this picture with intersections to services, to society, to consumption. So it's about traveling in the digital age. And the question we asked ourselves was, how could digitization help in making tourism more sustainable, if and how? And we had a very clever project set up. It has 3 steps. It starts out with structuring the field, then came modeling the impact, so the impact of digitization to tourism. And then there came a qualitative numerical assessment. And I hope that I can show you that that is a bit more than just putting numbers on beliefs. So there was a bit more behind that. So structuring the field, that was mainly Erik's part. And Well, of course, he started collecting all these concepts and buzzwords from a large number of studies from the literature. And then he started to condensing it, to abstracting structures from these many buzzwords, from these many concepts. And we always had a discussion where we said, but Eric, can't we just use an existing framework because there are so many around? And he said, yeah, well, there is something by Accenture, but it has this weakness, and there is something by someone else, but it's also not perfect. And in the end, inevitably, he came up with his own framework, obviously. That happens when you think about something long enough. So this is his or our framework we used, and I know very well that this is not the only framework around, and I know very well that you could discuss whether it is perfect or not. But the good news is it worked quite well for this study. So when you try to assess the impact of digitization on something, this might be a helpful framework. It has, like, 4 spheres, you could say: data connectivity, concerning big data analytics, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and then the next sphere is called data infrastructure, and there you have things like extended reality and digital accessibility and open data and smart mobile devices and security and data protection and blockchains and cloud computing. And outside is the data ecosystems, the social networks, the digital platforms, the sharing economy. And of course, we know that, for example, sharing economy heavily relies on digital platforms. We know that, and in the end, we put the two together. But in the beginning, it was like, well, sharing economy has a specific impact on tourism and thus on sustainable tourism, and that's why we had these two apart. And of course, we know that, for example, big data analytics alone has not so much value compared to the situation that you compare it to artificial intelligence, and maybe even compare it to open data. And I hope that I will be able to show you what that means when we talk about visitor management and recommenders. So, of course, there are intersections, but that was our working horse for the following steps. So that was structuring the field quite shortly, modeling the impact. So the question here was, how can we relay these fields, these areas of digitization, to the effects tourism can have on nature and environment on the one side, and on social issues on the other side. So this was commissioned by the German Environment Agency. So the natural and environmental aspects were in the first row for us, but we did not forget the social issues in assessing the effects. Well, and of course, there is an empty space in the middle, and we try to fill it with these 2 paths, if you want. So how can digitization have an effect on nature and environment and social issues? And our concept was broadly to say, well, it could happen through a change in travel volume. So the number of trips could grow or decrease, the distance covered to go somewhere to a destination could grow or decrease, or the numbers of days at the destination could grow or decrease. And we basically had the notion that an increase in travel volume would probably be a risk for sustainability, because it involves more mobility, a higher number of trips, and more distance covered. And in fact, when we draw upon data from Reiseanalyse, which Claudia mentioned in the beginning, we can see that the distances covered pre-COVID, of course, have risen considerably over the last 10, 15 years, while the number of days at the destination went down a little bit. So to say, we need more and more mileage to cover to spend the same number of amount of days in the destination, which shows that this change in travel volume is mainly a sustainability risk and not so much a sustainability opportunity. Which is not true for the second arrow, change in travel behavior. This can be towards a more sustainable direction or towards a more non-sustainable direction, depends on how people behave. So this was our base model, and then we started an inductive phase. Inductive means starting from the special case and trying to aggregate that up to a more general rule. And we heavily relied on a database maintained by a company, Trend One, They have a trend database, and we draw a relatively large number of examples out of that database, everything that had to do with travel and tourism and digitization. And we classified these examples. Of course, we also used other sources, but the Trend One database was the most helpful, in fact. And we categorized these examples to find areas of applications mainly. So to build up areas of application where could we see or where could we foresee that digitization would be impacting travel and tourism. Here's an example for such an example, an example for an example. A London-based startup, Whimsy, which finds the best destinations using an algorithm that combines the cheapest flights with past weather data. I tried to locate this startup, but I did not find it. Maybe their idea wasn't that good, I don't know. But anyway, this is an example for such an example. And here the area of application is in the category Big Data Analytics, Marketing, Sales, and Travel Planning. And the area of application plays a role in further modeling. On the right side, you have the effects, travel volume, and more sustainable travel behavior. And on the left side, you have these areas of application drawn from the examples, not only drawn from the examples, but mostly drawn from the examples inductively. And now we try to relate the left side to the right side, and we quickly saw that this would not be possible just by drawing arrows, but we had to explain how an area of application would be related to travel volume or to more sustainable travel behavior, and that we call the paths of impact. And here you can see that the area of application A is related to the path of impact A, and that has a green arrow to more sustainable travel behavior. So it is a sustainability opportunity. And what can happen is that an area of application has more than one relation to these paths of impact, and that a path of impact has a positive and a negative implication to one of the effects. That can happen. And it happened in the study. Okay, here to make it a bit more practical, these are general effects not relating to one category, but to all categories. For example, the surrogate path of impact, replacing travel with digital communication. That's what we are doing right now. We are not coming together at one place to have a face-to-face conference, but we are replacing travel with digital communication. And this is a path that would have a sustainability opportunity for travel volume, because travel volume would go down. On the other hand, energy and resource consumption of digital devices and networks. In 2018, there were not too many studies around that were able to assess that. In the meantime, a lot has happened. People have calculated that every email that you send produces about 5 grams of carbon dioxide, etc. But at that time, there was not so much. There were not so many studies to show that. And one other path, a bit more complicated, just to show how complicated things can get. We said, okay, if a company uses all these digitization categories, all these digitization applications, that can lead to a more efficient production. What does that mean? Well, it can mean two things. It can mean, for example, lower consumer prices, and lower consumer prices mean, by all standards of microeconomics, higher demand. So travel volume would rise if the production would be more efficient, for example, on the side of carriers, on the side of tour operators, etc. It could also mean that staff would be more productive. What would that mean? Well, it would mean that jobs get lost, and that would be a sustainability risk on the side of sustainable travel behavior in a very broad sense. So that was only to show the main picture of how that all worked. I've picked one example, big data analytics, and here again we had a lot of examples. For example, the Amsterdam city card analyzing the behavior of tourists to manage queues at attractions. That's related to the second part of the presentation. Or boosting Peru's tourism industry with big data, or Qualendra, an automated travel research for travel agency, etc. These are only, again, examples of the examples we used, and then we came up with these areas of application. And here you can see that, for example, there's one area of application of big data analytics, and that is visitor guidance. So guiding people to the destination or within the destination. And now the question is, how does it relate to the effect side? And for example, visitor guidance can have an effect to more sustainable travel behavior via the impact path of managing visitor flows. So you can use big data analytics to better manage visitor flows, and that can lead to a more sustainable travel behavior because you minimize the risk of overcrowding. It can also enable new encounters. So if you send people via this impact path to places they were not before and where there are inhabitants that are looking forward to meeting people instead of avoiding them, that has the opportunity of enabling new encounters. But you will certainly see that the potential impact of these two is quite different. While managing visitor flows is really would help solving a problem, enabling new encounters might be a bit less important or has less effect. And this was the way we tried to assess these paths of impact. So for example, up there in table 9, that's the visitor guidance, managing visitor flows, more sustainable travel behavior. And here we had a potential level of impact of 8 on a scale from 0 to 10. That was not the only scale we used. We also used a scale on probability of realization, the time scale of realization, so how soon will that happen, and also the reliability of our assessment, because if you do a work like that, you can never be sure that you're right, although we try to not only sit on the desk and do it, but also to discuss this with experts from the field, about 30 experts during a larger conference. So this was pretty much the way we did it. Here's the whole picture again. And now that was how we modeled the impact. And I would like to show you some results. You have seen that we have positive and negative paths of impact, those including opportunities, those including risks. And we had these two effect classes, travel volume and travel behavior. And altogether, we identified 50 paths of impact. And would like to invite you to maybe form for yourself an expectation, for example, how these 50 will be distributed between travel volume and travel behavior. What would you think? Is digitization having more impact on travel volume or travel behavior in the assessment we did the way I showed you? Well, this is not a quiz, of course, I will give you the answer. It's more on travel behavior and less on travel volume. So we identified more paths of impact. 80% of the paths of impact we identified were related to travel behavior and not to travel volume. Second axis, positive versus negative. Again, try to form an expectation how these numbers would be distributed. 25 positive, 25 negative, or 5 positive and 45 negative, or what would be your expectation? And again, we have much more positive paths of impact and less negative paths of impact. And of course, if you relate these two marginal distributions to the 4 cells in the middle, it is clear that travel behavior and positive paths of impact will have the largest number. Will it? Yes, it will. So there are 32 out of the 50 relating to travel behavior and positive paths of impact. While the negative paths of impact, here you have the majority of these paths in the travel volume part. So if we find negative paths of impact, the chance that it will relate to an increase in travel volume is bigger than a change in travel behavior towards the more sustainable side. And if you do a quick chi-square calculation on that, you end up with a chi-square value of 16.08. And if you want to handle that as sort of a sample, then you will have a p-value of close to 0 and a base factor of almost 500, which is very high. So there is a non-homogeneous structure in this table. This is the same. Well, we also did this with the scoring. So this was the number of paths you just saw. This is a scoring, the score on a scale from 0 to 10. And you see what turned out, or what came out best or highest in positive numbers is artificial intelligence. That were the paths of impact we had the most trust that it would be able to change travel and tourism towards a more sustainable way. Then came smart mobile devices, digital payment, then digital platforms and the sharing economy and the social networks, and then big data analytics. Some of them, for example, digital accessibility and open data, have very small numbers. It's the third last in the row. That's due to the fact that open data in itself does not have so much impact because it needs something else, for example, big data analytics or artificial intelligence, to really generate an impact, and that's why it's scored so low. So back to our picture with the little item of value and the big box. What can you take away from part one, where there are more chances than risks? The chances are mostly on the behavior side, and the risks are mostly on the travel volume side. And artificial intelligence was rated with the highest potential to make tourism more sustainable. And one outcome was that on the combination of big data analytics and artificial intelligence, intelligent recommender agents that would be able to encourage behavioral changes were relatively high on the list. And so in the second part, I would like to relate to that, and would talk a little bit about visitor management and recommender systems. So it was a result of the study that this would score highly, and the ministry said, okay, if you wrote that, then we believe it, and please set up a project and think about how to make a good visitor management and recommender system. So what I would like to do is talk a little bit about the status quo, and then relate that to the future. Not this status quo, but the status quo of visitor management and digital recommender systems, of course. And this is interlinked with our old friend, the coronavirus. So it has to do with Corona, of course. Corona has an impact on this need for visitor management and recommender systems, and that's why it is so urgent. You probably know this dashboard, UNWTO, and you can see that the number of international tourist arrivals was down by over 70% from January to October 2020 compared to the year before. That was the dashboard from yesterday. In fact, we see that although Corona has a most dramatic impact in terms of decreasing demand volume in most tourism areas, we can see that is not always the case. We also have other examples. This is an extract from a Swiss newspaper from April 2020, and I've translated the headline for you: Fear of Easter Tourists. Police plans defense actions. So you can think, if you only see the headline, that it's not about tourism, but about terrorism. Police plans defense actions to keep tourists away. That was in April 2020. A bit more recent, some pictures from German uplands. So not really mountains, not really flatlands, somewhere in between. In January 2021, what you could see is that all parking areas were just simply occupied. They flew over, and it was the first time in my professional experience that I saw destination managers say, please do not come. I've never experienced that before. A recent survey of the German Hiking Association, they asked about 300 destination representatives to compare the demand for hiking tours, or the demand for hiking paths, and the demand in natural landscapes 2020 versus 2019, and 92% of these people said there was an increase in demand for hiking, for being out in the nature. 6% said it was constant, and nobody said that there was a decrease. And so what we can see here is that not each and everybody was affected by decreases. Some parts were also affected by increases. We heard from a national park during a conference 2 days ago in Germany that their demand was up by 50% 2020 compared to 2019, plus 50%. And at the same time, the number of infringements, so the rangers caught somebody doing something they should not do, and they got a punishment. So the number of infringements was up by 700%. So 50% more demand, 700% more infringements. And that could mean that there is not only a change in demand volume, but also a change in demand structure. For example, during this winter, there were reports that the number of Instagram posing things was heavily increasing. Well, so that is the background for what comes next, because we can describe visitor management systems by a number of parameters: temporal parameters, spatial parameters, functional, and medial. Let's start with the media. Of course, you can do visitor management analogous at home via a newspaper, or en route by putting up signposts or by asking rangers, etc. But of course, the way forward is digital, because you can use it at home or en route. But I think that still, in practical terms, analog media are still very, very important, and we should not forget them. That's why they are here. Well, in spatial terms, you could look at a single hotspot like a mountain summit, or a parking area, as we have seen. Or you could look at a whole destination, or you could look at connecting destinations even. At the moment, we are mostly on the single hotspot basis. Functionally, you can try to influence people by informing them on how the situation is on the parking area X or the mountain summit Y. And that's what's usually being done before you start inhibiting, before you start blocking people out and saying you are not allowed to access this area anymore. And you can do both these functions, informing and inhibiting, either without alternatives or with alternatives. What does it mean? Well, without alternative would mean do not go here. That's the information I give you. With alternative would mean do not go here, but go there, because that's also interesting and it's not so crowded at the moment. The reason why we do not see systems that use alternatives is because it multiplies the number of parameters you have to implement in such a recommender system. Well, in between the two, there is, of course, nudging. Nudging is manipulation by design, if you want to. So it's about changing the information environment rather than the information itself. And on a temporal basis, of course, we can have static systems. So you put up a signpost and it is there until you change it years later, maybe. Or you can have dynamic real-time systems, or you can even have prognostic systems, which tell us something about how the situation will be in a few days. And it's obvious that if you think about it, it is not enough to tell somebody who has arrived at the parking area that it is full, because you can see it, but it would be much better to say, if you want to go to that place in 2 days' time, you can expect that it will be full or not full. So prognostic would be much better. A quick word on the data sources we can use for these continuous measurements needed to have a dynamic system, like local sensors, global sensors, web, social media, transactions. So we go through them quickly, but we should not forget one specifically important data source, which is not digital, but human. That's the people who know. The question where to put these sensors, which information to take, and which information to analyze, of course, always needs people who know the situation in the destination. We can't do without them. So local sensors, well, these are things like Wi-Fi counters, photo sensors, motion sensors, cameras, unmanned aerial vehicles, etc., etc. So everything you put into a specific place and they count what is happening there. Global sensors, as opposed to that, could be, for example, passive mobile data. If you switch on your smartphone and log into a mobile network, then the mobile network operator, the MNO, of course, registers that, and depending on the data regulation, the data protection regulation, the MNO can do things with the data, or can. Satellite images, we now have satellite images with a resolution of 30 centimeters. Commercially available. They're still quite expensive, but they are available. GPS positions from mobile devices, be it via the operation system like Android or iOS, or be it through apps on these mobile systems, could also be a help to not only spot one specific spot in the destination, but more than one. Or web and social media, where you could try to infer the usage of a destination by the usage of its website, or by the activities in social media like Twitter or like Instagram, or like search engine usage data like Google Trends, etc. And of course, you can use transaction data like destination bonus cards, booking data, cash register data in attractions, card payment system. MasterCard has set up a system to do that. So there is a number of solutions around. And if you look at this picture, it's a lot about big data. So these are big data or data sources. And in principle, we could say, well, they are all there. We just can use them. But I can tell you in practical terms, it's not as easy as that, because in most cases, we do not have access to these data, even if they are there. For a variety of reasons, we do not have access. They are heterogeneous, and we do not have the platforms to handle these data. They are just about being developed. So if someone says, well, it's big data and the big data is there, we do just need to use it, I think it's a little bit of a big data illusion. And this book does not exist. It's only a fake title. But someone should write it, The Big Data Illusion, describing how many data we have in principle and how little data we have in practice. ADAS worried on the prognostic side. So after the continuous measurements, of course, we need something to model or forecast, and Google does it. This is the Google Popular Times for the grocery store around the corner here. Not a very big grocery store, not a very important grocery store, but nevertheless, it's on Google, like thousands or hundred thousands or millions of other points of interest. This would be based on a model Google has derived from a number of data sources. And so they are modeling what you could reasonably expect on a Tuesday in January at 12 o'clock at this specific spot. And in addition to that, they give you a live information about how many people are actually there. And the problem here is not the modeling. We can do the modeling quite easily. This is for a beach resort in northern Germany, and it's for 3 years from January 2016 to December 2018. And each dot is a day. The gray dots are real data, so measurements of overnight tourists, and the red dots are model results. A relatively simply model using only 3 informations, and the information is which month do we have, what is the temperature, and how many federal states do have school-free days at the moment. So if we receive at a relatively good model, and it's not complicated, it's a simple fixed random effects model with the month being the random effects, of over 90% precision, then we should be able to model with more data, with more granulated data, much more effectively. So I think modeling is not the problem, but how do we get the data in? And of course, how do we get the data out of the system? Now let's skip to the future a little bit. And again, COVID will play a role. If you see the whole process of visitor management and recommender systems, it's about data collection, it's about data management, it's about modeling and forecasting, it's about the alternatives, which play a crucial role, I think, and it's about deployment. And pre-COVID-19, what we see in practice, at least what we saw here in our region, is some sensors, and they put their data into some computer, maybe into an Excel file or whatever. So a closed system on a very small scale. And what we actually saw is that COVID changed that a little bit. And it's still, of course, in the process of changing. We have more sensors, and the computers where the data are stored are a little bit more numerous, but they are still mostly closed systems. And closed systems have the disadvantage that the number of deployment channels available to such a system are relatively small. And of course, we have a bottleneck on the deployment side because the more people you can reach with your deployment channels, the more effective this system will probably be. And here's an example from northern Germany, from a beach resort on the Baltic Sea coast. And they won a prize for this just recently. Congratulations to Andre and Paul. And what they did is they just simply counted the number of people going to specific beach sections. And then they put a traffic light system behind that. And you can see that there are 2 sections that at this point in time are already yellow and all others are green. And then they also have the parking area information related to it. You might say, well, this is not rocket science. Exactly, this is not rocket science, but it did not exist before COVID-19. It simply was not there. And in that sense, COVID-19 was sort of a catalyst, was sort of a starting point for a new thinking about this whole question of visitor management and recommender systems, because now, again, it showed the need that we should do something on that. And that knowledge, of course, was available before, but nobody did anything. And now the need is there. So what is the prospect for the future, medium and long term? I think that it will involve several aspects. The first is that we will need much more data sources. And not only more data sources, but only more various data sources, a large variety of data sources. We will not be able to measure each and everything with local sensors. We will need the global sensors. We will need the transaction data for specific points, and somehow bring that all together in a data infrastructure, in a data hub that can handle that, and that also is able to redistribute the results in an open format. Maybe the FiWare platform that has been developed for smart cities can be a step forward in that. We will see, but I think that it is necessary to have these platforms. And then, of course, we need some modeling and forecasting. And again, we need the alternatives. And this is only one symbol on the slide, but actually, when you think about it, it will actually multiply the workload for these systems, because it is then not enough to say what's happening at one spot, but you have to keep in mind what's happening at a variety of spots around it, and how can I recommend now to send people back and forth. And that works in a lab environment, no doubt about that. So the technological or technical side of it is already solved, but the practical side is not. And if you have an example for that, I would love to learn it. And again, we have the deployment, and here you see the number of bubbles has increased, and that's because of the open data infrastructure. The more open the data infrastructure is, the more chances you have for a wide deployment of your information. Actually, together with the guys from Interactive and a bunch of other experts from destination management, we had a conceptual framework. It's called AIR, the AI-based recommender for sustainable tourism. And that is pretty much the basic idea behind that. And you see a user plans a trip, and the system checks the capacity load on the destination for that trip. And if it's okay, it gives you a routing information. If not okay, it has to search for alternatives. And that's exactly the crucial point we would need. So again, what are the items of value in this big styrofoam package? Part 2, I think from my side, it's that crowding becomes more and more of a problem. And COVID-19 has showed that dramatically. That means that smart digital visitor management systems are needed. And I think we are on a good path to convince all stakeholders in the civil society that this is important, but we are still only at the starting point. So I'm through. Thank you for your attention. And maybe, Claudia, you would like to look if we have some questions, or if we have some points of discussion. I would like to answer that, and looking forward to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dirk, for this really great presentation. So there were also some comments and some props for you that it was easy to listen, very well prepared, and the people liked your topic. Here are 3 questions. So the first one comes from Juho Personen. He asks, how can sustainable travel behavior be defined? Often sustainability is defined through economic, societal, and environmental effects. So many times tourism behavior that increased economic sustainability might decrease environmental sustainability. Thus, defining travel behavior as sustainable or non-sustainable is difficult. So I think this is what we also discussed several times. So maybe you have a short answer for Juho, or you meet him later. Yeah, but please go ahead.
Well, I can try it. First of all, I think that if you always rely on the 3 pillars, you are risking to go into the wrong direction, because you can justify each and every step you take with, well, but it has a positive economic effect. And that's why, if you have looked very carefully, I know it was quick, we did not talk about economic impact, but about the distribution of economic effects. That, I think, is the crucial point. But apart from that, I think we should concentrate on environmental and social effects. Point 1. Point 2 is, from a consumer researcher perspective, I cannot expect consumers to say, I'm traveling sustainably and I'm traveling not sustainable. Because each and every travel is in a way not sustainable, because it involves mobility. Yeah. So what we can reasonably expect as consumer researchers is that the consumer takes the choice for the more sustainable alternative. And that's pretty much all.
Thank you. Good answer. I like it. So the next one is from Matthias. Matthias Fuchs from Sweden. He asks now, how are or can usage intentions and conditions, e.g. type of data analyzed, knowledge shared, etc., for each application be held constant? It is here also in the chat for you. Okay.
I read it and I try to figure out what he means. I mean, I know Matthias is a very smart guy and he probably has thought about it, but maybe I'm too dumb to really understand what he means. I'm sorry.
Maybe you meet him later for a personal.
Might be, yeah.
Yeah. And here's another one from Johanna Heinonen. Thinking about responsibility, is there any knowledge how capable companies are in handling all the digital applications in terms of GDPR perspective, security, etc.?
There probably is, but not with me. Sorry.
Okay.
I don't know. We didn't study that. We didn't assess.
Yeah.
It's a relevant question, I think, but it's more on the managerial side, which we did not discuss too deeply in the study, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, there are 2 more questions. So I start with Anke Su. The report said that increased visitor numbers resulted in a negative impact on tourism sustainability. Does you, Dirk, think that it be possible to use digitalization tools to solve issues of over-tourism so that it actually improves sustainability?
Yes, and what I try to show in the second part is, for example, a recommended and visitor management tool that is based on big data analytics, that is based on artificial intelligence modeling, could actually help solving that. So the answer is a clear yes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. There is another question from Kirsi. Whom or which institutions at which level, Germany, the destinations, Europe, or whatever, do you see as developers or owners of the medium long-term perspective?
That's a very interesting question, and it relates a bit to what Martin yesterday talked about. Who are the process owners and who is actually having the digital leadership in that? And I think that digital leadership, so technological leadership, is only one part of the discussion, but political leadership, so who pushes that forward, is the second part. And it's very clear that it will not work without public funding. specifically in this early phase. And I made the experience that those who are in the first line affected of problems of crowding are those who try to react. That can be a city, that can be a whole destination, that can be a national park. It depends a little bit on the destination. But what is clear is that without a state funding, it will not happen, because these systems will become complex, very quickly, as you've seen when you think about the alternatives, for example. So it will become very quickly very big, and no destination, no city on its own will be able to do it. It needs some public funding, actually.
Maybe it is also not necessary that someone is leading the process, because it is a process of all stakeholder. I quote the example of Venice. Maybe you have heard about that. Venice, they put beacons to organize visitor management in different parts of the city, and they have a huge dashboard where they control all the movements of the visitors, and if there's a crowded place, they have defined numbers, how many people can be there. If there's a crowded place, they send you a message on your smartphone, please don't go there. It's like the red light you showed before from the beach. Yeah.
Yes, but actually we must see that places like Venice are very special places, because they are, excuse me if someone from Venice listens now, it's more like a theme park. So you have a very small area which can be controlled very effectively, and of course they have this massive problem. And in such an environment, it is relatively easy to implement such a system. But when you think about larger destinations or cross sections of destinations, it becomes more and more complex.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So Matthias tries it again. He says, is it just the average usage way, or you had assumptions, empirical evidence, and so on? So maybe it's clearer now. You can answer.
Yeah, thank you, Matthias. Yes, it was a mixture of all of that. So if we could find, we of course used empirical data as a base for the assessment we did. And as I said, we did not do the assessment alone, but with experts from the tourism industry. But sometimes we had to rely on the average usage way, as you put it, exactly. And to reflect a little bit on that, we put this fourth indicator in it. You might remember that, which showed the feeling of reliability we had ourselves in the assessment, and it was not always at 8 or 9 points.
Thanks a lot, Dirk, for being here this morning. And
thank you.
Thank you, really. And I think maybe you can answer a last question with the outlook. I got the impression in the last part of your presentation that COVID-19 also supports the process at the moment, and that it gives us a very good perspective to opening, let's say, the containers of all the data that are around, that we really can use it. What do you think if you look at that development at the moment?
Well, I think that in some places, COVID-19 has drastically shown the need for exactly that process. It's a bit strange. Everybody knew it even before COVID, but only few actually acted. And now I think that COVID-19 actually shows the need to put that into action. In Germany, we had this place Winterberg, which was running through the press because it was overwhelmed by people. And I received an email from the mayor of Winterberg who told me, if we would have had such a system before that, it would have saved us a lot of pain. So this shows maybe that the need to do something in that regard has become bigger.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dirk. So
thank you. Thank you also for organizing this wonderful conference. I really like it. I really enjoy it. It's great.
Thanks, Dirk. Thank you for your insights today. And I would like to end the session here in the main hall. invite you all to the room Air. There will be presented research papers at destination models. In the room Water, there are research papers on recommendation and data mining. And in the room Earth, there is the workshop Enter Exchange, exploring changes in tourist perceptions towards technology. So have a great day. And we are moving on here in the main hall at 2:30 with Oliver Poole and the question, which future moves us? Thanks.